Hello, welcome to a brand new video. John Stuart Mill's Utilitarianism is one of the most influential texts in moral philosophy. At its core, Mill defines utilitarianism as the view that, quote, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. Therefore, all human actions ultimately aim at happiness. Even things like virtue and money and health are not ends in themselves, but are a means to happiness. John Stuart Mill, as Jeremy Bentham's successor, built upon his theory by distinguishing between higher and lower pleasures. Higher pleasures are intellectual, moral, and aesthetic pleasures like reading philosophy, experiencing arts, or pursuing knowledge, while lower pleasures are bodily and sensory pleasures like eating or physical comforts. And this was to avoid the criticism that utilitarians were boundless hedonists. He was trying to say that human dignity and rational capacities elevate our preferences and should shape our happiness, or our conception of happiness, as seen in higher pleasures. This is why people will not trade their rational and moral and emotional faculties for mere contentment. However, as humans, we do fall prey to the temptations of the lower pleasures. He says, quote, it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Yes, there is a hedonistic foundation of utilitarianism, with pleasure being the ultimate good, but Mill grounds it in a moral framework. The utility of utilitarianism is the promotion of general happiness, not just individual pleasure. Therefore, the moral rule is to act in a way that maximizes collective well-being. This isn't because it feels good, but because it produces good consequences for society. A good action reflects and shapes good character, and a truly good moral character can't consistently produce bad conduct. Therefore, Mill distinguishes between personal happiness and social utility, and moral actions consider not only the agent's own happiness, but the happiness of others. Mill also introduces a psychological dimension to his utilitarian ethic as well. He makes a distinction between internal and external sanctions. Internal sanctions are like conscience, guilt, and the desire for unity with others. They're the internal moral compass that develops from human nature and social life. External sanctions, on the other hand, are the fear of punishment and social approval. He argues that we naturally want happiness and unity with others, and this drives our concern for the general good, not just personal benefit. Knowing right from wrong is innate in human beings. How do we know that murder or stealing or lying is wrong? According to Mill, it's because of the greatest happiness principle. The greatest happiness principle is known as the principle of utility, and it's a concept that's core in utilitarianism, and it states that actions are right if they tend to promote happiness and wrong if they produce the reverse of happiness, and that has been established thus far. In simpler terms, it means choosing actions that maximize overall happiness and minimize suffering. That being said, we also learn from our everyday experiences. Maybe one day you were a kid and you saw this glowing red hot thing and decided to grab it, and look where that got you, with a burnt hand and full of tears. The main point of this inductive theory is that you learned. Mill claimed that all moral theories, such as virtue ethics or Kantian deontological ethics, or even divine command theory, all of them are utilitarian in principle. As for virtue ethics, virtues are not in competition with happiness, they are an integral part of it. The mind is not in a proper state unless it loves virtue. As for Kantian deontological ethics, which says that morality is about acting from duty or from the goodwill, or not from the outcomes, but rather the principle. Mill said that this is also just utilitarianism, which is probably just a step backwards. Kant, according to his first categorical imperative, stated that one should only act according to maxims that be willed as universal law. What that means is, even though there's many interpretations of this, but what it means is that one moral action should be one that could be applied universally without contradiction in any time, place, or situation. For example, lying is wrong because if everyone lied at the same time or place or in a situation, then the very concept of telling truth would collapse, and lying itself would be meaningless, as there would be no truth or no communication, and the act of lying would be contradictory because it contradicts its own purpose. which is to deceive within a framework of truth. However, this leads to utilitarianism because the rationale behind such a universal law rests on the consequences for human well-being and social cohesion. Mill argues that if a principle cannot be universally applied without producing contradiction or societal collapse, then it is not morally sound precisely because its application will lead to harmful outcomes. In other words, the test of universality and ultimately hinges on whether the consequences preserve or undermine human happiness and human flourishing. And I don't know if he said anything directly about divine command theory, but he would probably say that following God's commands will lead to a good outcome, so therefore it's utilitarian. There's also a distinction between act utilitarianism and ruled utilitarianism. The former states judge each action by whether it maximizes happiness, while the latter states follow general rules that usually lead to the best outcomes. As for which one Mill followed, he's probably not strictly either, probably a combination of both. Now that we've gone over the general principles of utilitarianism, I want to go through some objections to his theory and what are John Stuart Mill's responses. In chapter 4 of his book, Mill offers a controversial argument for utilitarianism. Quote, "The only proof of a thing is desirable is that people actually desire it." So what that means is just like seeing is proof that something is visible, desiring shows that something is desirable. And when that is applied to utilitarianism, since everyone desires for their own happiness, it follows that happiness is good for each person, and therefore general happiness is good for all collectively. Someone like David Hume would rebut that you can't derive an ought from an is, or someone might say that he's confusing what is desirable with what is ought to be desired, and others might say that there's a fallacy of composition. Still, Mill believes that this is as close to proof as moral philosophy can get. He said that the fundamental principle, like utility, cannot be proven in the strictest sense like a mathematical proof, but still offers pragmatic considerations and supports it. Another objection is that focusing on pleasure does not make it any different, or doesn't make us any different from pigs. Mill's reply to this, as mentioned earlier, was the distinction between higher and lower pleasures. Another objection is that happiness is unattainable. Mill responds that while perfect happiness may be rare, a life with more pleasure than pain is achievable. Some object and say it's too demanding or unrealistic to expect everyone to maximize happiness constantly. Mill says that utilitarianism evaluates morality of actions, not constant motive. Most actions contribute to general happiness indirectly. Others object by saying it takes God out of the equation. Mill rebuts this by claiming that if God desires human happiness, then utilitarianism aligns with religious ethics. Another objection is that there's no time for calculating all the consequences to see what creates pleasure or pain. For this, Mill introduces a two-tiered system. This is to generally follow established moral rules, which have been proven to promote happiness, such as not lying, unless there's a strong reason to go against them, such as if it produces greater overall happiness. The last objection is that utilitarianism may permit injustice if doing so benefits overall happiness. For this, Mill finds the origins of our sense of justice. It comes from both a desire to retaliate and to sympathize for the wronged. A wrong is unjust only if it violates someone's rights, and rights should be protected if doing so promotes general happiness. And also what counts as just varies widely, and he believes that utilitarianism provides a rational method for resolving these disputes by appealing to overall well-being. Lastly, in some rare cases, utility may demand setting aside what would otherwise be seen as just in favor of greater moral outcome. And that brings us to the end of this video. So what do you make of John Stuart Mill's theory of utilitarianism? At its heart, it's a moral theory rooted in something universal, our shared pursuit of happiness, and he challenges us to elevate our taste and to weigh our actions by their consequences for everyone, not just ourselves, and therefore build a world of justice, virtue, and well-being, and it all goes hand in hand. Let me know in the comments below whether you agree or disagree with his ideas, or if you think maybe deontological ethics is better, or if virtue ethics is better, or if you have your own idea of what morality is. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.